we've got a housing problem all across this country. We live in America now where there's plenty of housing available if you want to buy a McMansion. There's just not housing available for middle-class families, for working families, for the working poor, for the poor, and for the homeless. And the only way we're going to change that is not housing vouchers. The way we're going to change it is we're going to put real money in from the federal government to build new housing units. I have a proposal to build over 3 million new housing units here in America, in urban areas, in rural areas, and I wanted to be down in Mississippi to talk about this. But I want to tell you a part of that proposal because it tells you something about how I think we have to think about this problem. My proposal will reduce rents, Moody says, by about 10% across the board by getting more housing and better housing available to people. But the question of home ownership is also tied up in this. Across this country, for a long time now, home ownership has been the #1 way that families build wealth, working families do. #1 retirement plan in America, pay off your house and live on your Social Security. It's the one asset people buy that appreciates over time and intergenerationally. So if grandma and grandpa can live in the house until they pass, the next generation gets a boost, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. That's why it should be no surprise to anybody in this room that for decades and decades and decades, the federal government subsidized the purchase of housing for white people. For black people, they discriminated against them. And the method of doing this was known as redlining. So they drew off areas where they said plenty of subsidized mortgage assistance, except in the areas inside redlining. The consequence of that, generation after generation after generation, that's been one of the huge drivers of the black-white wealth gap. Well, we can't be in an America that says, well, you know what? We decided not to do that anymore, so everything's okay now. It's not okay. So look at it this way. Back in 1960, when housing discrimination was still legal, think about that, the black-white homeownership gap, right, between the two was 18 points, right, between blacks and white families. Then along comes the civil rights movement, and by golly, we outlaw housing discrimination, redlining goes away, and I will say this, two very interesting things happen. The black-white wealth gap and the black-white homeownership gap starts to shrink, and everybody starts to buy more homes. So it goes up for everybody does better when everybody does better, right? It's moving up, but the wealth gap is shrinking. This is a good thing. It tells us law matters. And then what happens? Long about the year 2000, right in there, the big banks look over the edge and they say, whoa, look at that community. African-American communities, Latino communities, there's some wealth in there. Let's go sell them the most horrible, cheating, lying mortgages possible. That's what they did. And let's see how much wealth we can drag out of those communities. Now, they started figuring out how to make that work. It was the so-called subprime mortgage crisis. And understand, it didn't start with people trying to buy homes. It started with mortgage companies that went to people who already owned homes and helped take those homes away from them. They then targeted seniors who had built up a lot of equity. And over time, they spread it across the country. This is when, by now, we're in the early 2000s. I'm ringing the bell saying, this is coming. We're going to have a crash. People can't, the debt is unsustainable. Millions of people in this country are going to lose their homes. Millions are going to lose their jobs. Millions are going to lose their savings. But nobody in Washington wanted to hear this. I learned a fact. When your ears are stuffed with money, you can't hear well.
on. I just want to address this.
Can I just do the last part of this?
Of course.
So all I want to say about the last part of this is the one-two punch from the housing crash means that today in America, black and white homeownership rates are larger than they were back when housing discrimination was legal. So I got a plan. I do. 3 million new housing units, but here's a core part of that plan. It says everybody who lives or lived in a formerly redlined district can get some housing assistance now to be able to buy a home. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction.